I can imagine that Las Vegas Raiders fans are feeling some disappointment, probably upset a little bit about the way that this season has turned out for the team. I get it, because you're talking about a team that last year navigated through all the crap with John Gruden and his racism and whatever the hell freaking hate he was spewing via emails. It magically surfaces. He's gone. And now you're like, okay, the guy that you thought was going to be the head coach for 10 years, he's made a little over 2. Now what do? And the team responds, rallies behind interim head coach Rich Bisaccia, and they end up, if you remember, winning that Sunday night game the last week of the year against the Chargers, and they go on and make the playoffs. So you're thinking, okay, this team overcame that, still made the playoffs. They fired their piece of crap general manager, Mike Mayock. Things are looking good. Then in the offseason, they make the big trade for Davante Adams. Forgive Raiders fans for not having some reason to potentially feel like they should be excited. I know there was certainly maybe some concern or some questions about Josh McDaniels. Like, I could see both the positives and the negatives. When that hire happened, I'm like, this is a guy that's really good in terms of offensive football. But man, that was a guy that also really bombed in Denver. This is a guy who left the Colts high and dry a few years ago. But is he really going to be that much worse than Gruden was, frankly? And now you've brought in Davante Adams. You've got a legit number 1 wide receiver. You're pairing him with Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow. You've got Josh Jacobs in the backfield. Like, you know, there's a reason to be excited about this Raiders team if you were Raiders fans, even if you're looking at that AFC West and you're saying, shit, you got the Chiefs there, you got the Chargers there, the Broncos have made the big move for Russell Wilson. You know what I mean? Like, I can understand it. I wasn't that big on this Raiders team heading into this year, as much of a victim of circumstance of the division that they were in, as much as anything else. But I'm sure this season's been a big what the fuck moment, because the Raiders sit here now at 6-9, and no chance of the playoffs. You know, way out of striking distance of the Chiefs and the Chargers in the AFC West. And even worse for a Raiders fan, you're left wondering this season what could have been. 8 of the team's 9 losses this year were by 7 points or less. So when you talk about teams winning close games or losing close games, you know, good teams find ways to win close games. Bad teams find ways to lose close games. In particular, bad coaches find ways to lose close games, especially when their team shouldn't be losing that many close games. It'd be one thing if the Raiders were like on the come up and they were losing these close games. You'd be like, okay, a little more talent, another year of experience, they'll find a way to win some of these. That shouldn't be the case here for the Raiders. Even worse, out of those 8 losses by 7 points or less, 4 out of those 8, so half of them, were by 3 points or less. So if you just find a way to win those 4 games where you lost by 3 points or less, you're talking about a 10-5 Raiders team that's well in the mix of the playoffs. They might not be winning the AFC West because that pretty much belongs to the Chiefs, but you know, they're a team that's getting into the playoffs and a team that might have a chance to win a playoff game. Like, what the hell? Of course, the defense still stinks, which has been a running theme for the Raiders for years. It was under Gruden. It was before Gruden. It is now under McDaniels. 23rd in points allowed this year, 25th in yards allowed. So, you know, you bring in Josh McDaniels, you bring in a new GM, and it feels like more of the same old Raiders. And this week, we saw the decision that came to bench Derek Carr in favor of Jarrett Stidham for the last 2 games of this season. And I will say it's odd, the timing of this, in terms of you went this long. If you were going to make this move, shouldn't you have maybe done it a few weeks ago? What's also odd is that they basically told Derek Carr, we don't want you here. Like, you could say, oh, they came to an agreement and they thought it was best. He wouldn't be a distraction. How much of a distraction is the guy going to be if he's showing up and he's not the starter? You know, Derek Carr doesn't strike me as the type of guy that would be like a snake in the grass piece of crap. You know what I mean? He strikes me as a relatively decent dude, team guy, even if he's burning inside because he wants to play, he wants to compete. He doesn't strike me as the type of guy that would undercut Stidham to the rest of the team. He might. Or maybe you're saying the rest of the team would undercut Stidham because they would rather play with Derek Carr. But you basically send Derek Carr home the last couple of weeks of the season with an early vacation, early PTO. That's what you did. So that's odd. I mean, I guess at this point, you already know you're not going to the playoffs. So the best thing for the Raiders at this point is to try and lose these last 2 games and protect what other draft position that you have. Find out what you got in Stidham. You know Stidham is not the long-term answer at quarterback. Don't be crazy. But you give a couple of games of something else. And I've seen a lot of reactions about this. A lot of people surprised about the Raiders making the decision to bench Derek Carr here, thinking that this is the wrong decision, saying, you can't blame Derek Carr for what's happened this year. And the bottom line is this. The Raiders have absolutely made the right decision. They should have done this a few years ago. They should have long since moved off of Derek Carr. They've just kept kicking that can down the road. And it looks like they're finally gonna pay the piper here. As they should. This is not me saying that Derek Carr sucks, because he does not suck. He is not elite, but he is not trash. He's in the middle when you think about quarterbacks in the league. He's in that 10 to 16 tier, depending upon how you want to look at it. Which you could argue is maybe the worst place to be. Because there's enough there that you think that he can be better than he actually is, but he's not so bad where it's so obvious that he's not the guy. And that's been the problem for the Raiders for years. Believing that he could be more and the team could be more with him than what they ever were actually going to be. This is not an indictment on Derek Carr being bad or being terrible. This is about not wanting to pay a quarterback to the tune of a $34 million cap hit in 2023 just for him to potentially be mediocre and the damn team to be mediocre. If you're going to do that, if you're going to be mediocre or even suck, then you might as well save a shit ton of money, especially for a cash-strapped owner like Mark Davis. Why would you want to sit there and keep playing Derek Carr? It doesn't make any sense. Taking him out now, protecting him from injury, also protects the organization. It's the right business decision. Frankly, it's the right football decision. Because a couple of years ago, when they hired John Gruden and they gave him that dumb dick 10-year, $100 million contract, they should have moved on from Derek Carr then. You don't hire a head coach for that length of term of contract and then say, hey, we're just going to try to toil and make do with what we got. No, that's the time that you rebuild. You gut the shit, you bottom out, and you start over because you've got certainty at the head coaching position. And the Raiders couldn't even fucking do that right. But of course, you're a Raiders fan, you're going to say, well, it wouldn't matter because you look at Mike Mayock's history of drafting in round 1, and yeah, you got a point there. But this is about the Raiders saying we don't want Derek Carr to get hurt because we're either going to trade him in the offseason or we're going to release him and take a $5 million dead cap hit instead of having to pay him and take a $35 million cap hit next year. Like, who the fuck would want to pay $35 million to Derek Carr for the team to be bad? To which is certainly going to elicit the response of, you sound like you're blaming Derek Carr. You're not listening. Their defense has been as big a problem as anything during Derek Carr's time there with the Raiders. Am I wrong? Of course I'm not wrong. But when you talk about tying up like 15% of your salary cap into one player, and that one player is not elite, that is a problem. You don't do that. Derek Carr, to me, is West Coast Cousins. Not elite, never will be, maybe even a little more turnover prone. He's a guy that you can win games with, occasionally a game because of, but he's not the type of guy that's going to be able to shoulder the team. He's not going to be the guy that transcends the talent around him. He's just not that dude. So why pay this guy that much to be a mid-ass team? It doesn't make any fucking sense. And as bad as Josh McDaniels has arguably been this year, it's hard to see the team moving on from him after 1 year. So something's got to give, something's got to go. It's cheaper for the Raiders and more valuable and more beneficial for the Raiders to move on from Derek Carr now than it is to move on from Josh McDaniels. So the answer is Derek Carr has got to go. And I mean, when you think about it honestly, Raiders fans, you talk about a guy that's been the primary starter there for 9 years, 0 playoff wins. Other guys could have done that. Other guys can continue to do that and cost the Raiders significantly less. right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. Now, should the Raiders be thinking about releasing him? No, they should be trying to trade him. Find a sucker like the Colts. Find a sucker like the Commanders. Find a sucker like the Giants. There should be teams that would be in the market for Derek Carr in 2023. No reason to release him for the fuck all of it. Try to get some return on your investment there. There should be some type of market because he can play. He's just not elite. But the Raiders are taking a look at this as an organization and, to me, making the logical decision that should have been made a few years ago. If you're not going to be elite at the quarterback position, you don't have an elite team around the non-elite quarterback, then what the fuck are you doing? And the Raiders have said, we don't like what we're doing. We've got to change that. We're better off understanding the modern game and trying to understand the modern economics of trying to get a young quarterback, which you would assume is going to come either in 2023 or 2024. Like, they've got to do something different. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the results to be any different. That's what they've been doing for the past almost decade with Derek Carr as a starter. He'll probably start somewhere else in 2023 and be solid but not spectacular. Meanwhile, the Raiders will probably suck in 2023, but how much different was it than what they did here in 2022 with Derek Carr? It was time. It's been time for a couple of years. And long term, there's a big if the Raiders execute properly, which again is a massive big if, but long term, this organization can be better off for the decision that they made now.